Maybe I'll try to clip this and put it at the beginning. The point of the paper is that you might have all this chemical energy around, but there's a lot of things that are going into whether or not you are using it and how you are using it.
Hi, my name is Linnea.
I'm Bezia.
And I'm Linnea, and this is episode number 29 of the Lemma Journal Club.
What is the Lemma Journal Club?
The Lemma Journal Club is the show where we read every paper to tell you if you need to read it. You probably do.
We have a terrific review paper for you today. We are talking about a paper entitled When a Bath is Not Enough by Michael Murrell. Its subtitle is State-Dependent Energy Injection and Non-Monotonic Dissipation in Cytoskeletal Matter.
So, Bez, why did you pick this paper?
I picked this paper because 2 journal clubs ago, we were talking about these out of equilibrium information engines. And one of the things we talked about is how does this system change when you have many components and many motors? We were like, oh, it would be nice to have a review paper. This paper came up, and Michael Murrell has been pushing this very unique entropy production rate narrative for a long time. I like this narrative, and I feel his struggle in putting it out, because I tried to talk to people about entropy production rate a little bit 2-3 years ago and was really met with stares that people did not want to hear me talk about it. So I think he's really fighting an uphill battle that I think is great to fight. And I thought that this paper might shed some light on what we talked about 2 weeks ago. I don't think it succeeded in that.
Interesting.
This paper is really about a different thing than 2 weeks ago. I do think it was a fun paper to read. This is our first review paper.
Woohoo!
I fundamentally hate review papers. That has nothing to do with this one. I hate talking about review papers. I have said to many people that we will not do review papers when they asked us to do review papers and to give context to what we're going to talk about. They're slowly winning.
The review papers?
No, the people who ask us to give context.
Do we give context?
We're slowly giving more and more
I don't
context.
know. I listened to our previous episode on the drive over here, and it was no context.
I have a little thing about how it's a paper about actin and microtubule mixtures. It's not enough context to help anybody, but it is more context than we would normally give each other. Like, why did I say that? Was I describing to you that the paper was about actin and microtubules as if you might be recently overcoming like amnesia?
This paper received July 2025, published April 2026.
What?
So talking about an uphill battle with entropy production rate continues to be an uphill battle, it seems.
What the heck is that?
I mean,
Good catch. What the heck? I've never seen anything like that. What is that?
One interpretation is that it's a single author paper by a full professor and he got it back and he was teaching or something.
But got it back? Like someone had like actual like reviews to a review paper?
Yeah, I guess so. Again, there's an uphill battle with thinking about things in this.
This is published in PRX Life. PRX came out a couple of years ago. I'm going to say it came out 2020. And it was supposed to be like the flagship APS journal going to compete with Cell Nature Science, right?
Yeah.
That didn't happen. But then like just a year or two later, I'm going to say 2022, PRX Life came to bleed a little bit of PRX away. So
you don't think it's like now we have a sub-journal of PRX so that when you are not good enough for PRX, we can shove you down to PRX Life?
Wasn't that PRL, PRR, PRE?
No, we've talked about how PRL wouldn't take this kind of paper anymore.
That's true.
So like if you're going to do biophysics in an APS journal, what journal, like, and PRX is supposed to be top tier. What is your other APS journal you could possibly go to?
I mean, I don't like dislike PRX Life by any means. I just think the timing of its creation shortly after PRX kind of diverted the biophysics papers away from PRX and makes me less likely to submit to PRX, essentially. Although I see biophysics papers, so like it's PRX Life, that's how you think of it. You think of it as a sub-journal to PRX. That's where you go if you didn't get into PRX. That's an interesting way to think about it.
Well, I don't go to the PRX homepage, but my assumption was that PRX also took other kinds of physics, not just bio.
Of course,
stuff.
Okay. This is a review article in PRX Life, how people choose where to put reviews, I normally think of it like who asked you to write a review article.
Yeah.
Presumably PRX Life asked Michael Murrell to write this review article and then punished him by making him revise it for a year. This is so weird. I would like to believe that they sent it out, it got shoved somewhere on his desk and he couldn't work on it for a long time.
Yeah, that it was just like slow to find reviewers, slow to be reviewed. But I was even unaware that review papers go through review process.
They go through review light. Just a bunch of people say, yep, looks like your review. Thumbs up. This person has opinions.
They didn't cite me. Please cite me.
Yeah. Speaking of which.
So he doesn't cite any preprints.
He doesn't cite any preprints. I did look up the rules.
Yeah.
PRX Life, he is allowed to cite preprints.
So it's an interesting, it must be a conscious decision on his part to not cite preprints.
Possibly.
What do you think of that decision?
I'm not sure that that's correct, but that might be correct. I'm not going to try to do much mind reading with Michael Murrell because I feel like I already do too much mind reading. This is somebody who I tried to go work with for my postdoc and who I also believe was very likely a reviewer on my paper that ended up not going to Science. And so we're going to try to do minimal mind reading to Michael Murrell. Yeah, no mind reading there.
In your review paper, did you cite preprints?
In our review paper, we were not allowed to cite preprints.
And what do you think of that kind of rule?
I'm generally against any rules regarding reviews. Like, I would like there to be a difference in just title between review and opinion. And to be honest, like this paper, I don't know what this paper is. At first, I was like, this is an opinion paper, not a review paper, which is fine. We call those reviews anyways. My opinion paper is called a review paper, whatever. But then as you go through it, this is really a review of everything that Michael Murrell has ever done in his career. And in that way, it really is a review. Like you could hand this paper, if you're joining his lab as a graduate student, you could hand this paper to the person who just joined the lab and be like, this is everything our lab has ever done and thought about. Read it, understand all the citations, and then you're good to go. That's your first 2 years in this lab.
Yeah, so this brings me to one of my major complaints of this paper, which is that it's not in the language that I speak. It is in actomyosin and not microtubules kinesin. And so the activation barrier for understanding the...
Look, it's like Dutch and Flemish. The difference between the actomyosin dialect and the kinesin microtubules dialect is really quite minor, right?
It's confusing enough to me. Yeah, when he starts getting to this, like, contractile is less energy consuming than static, I was like... my intuition is not there.
One thing I'll say, the last episode, we sent out the episode a couple days in advance to the first authors, and they responded. And John Beresny gave a verbal response, and that was brilliant to listen to and a lot of fun. And so I think we're going to do that from now on, that we'll try to stay ahead enough to send things out to people. I don't know if we're going to succeed in that. A lot of these get recorded like 5 minutes before they go out. We should have in our mind that there's like a 25% chance that whoever we're talking about is going to verbally respond at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And I actually find this super painful. John Beresny's response, I then wanted to respond to his response. He like misinterpreted some things I said and like had answers that brought up other questions to me and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And it's just like the asynchronous response is way better than nothing. But
yeah, we did get written responses as well from some of the other first authors. And I couldn't resist replying to one of the authors and saying, wait, I think we're talking about different things. And then we had a little conversation over email, but that doesn't get included. Yeah. But it does make me miss, both of these papers kind of make me miss the active matter world. And just like somehow at the end of my PhD, I really felt like I was in a community and an expert there, like one of the people who could think the most agilely about these kinds of questions. And have I done that in my postdoc? Am I part of a community?
Yeah.
Am I an expert in anything
new? Yeah.
We've been here almost as long as we were in our PhDs.
Yeah.
And so reading these papers and thinking about these ideas again, I'm like, yeah, how do I get this feeling back? Like, this is really what drew me into research, of being an expert in a thing and really being able to make progress because I know more about this particular niche than anybody else.
I think part of the problem here is I never really had in my mind that the postdoc was essentially going to be a full second PhD.
Yeah.
Like even 3 years ago, it looked for a moment like you were going to get a job as a professor in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And then,
it would have been a moment of a postdoc.
Yeah, it would have been about half the length of a postdoc. And so at every point in the postdoc, we were always like 1 foot still in our PhD, 1 foot in a future career that never materialized. And so the postdoc essentially is like a very similar structure to a PhD, but shittier. The other thing is I thought really, 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 really hard about where I wanted to do a PhD and who I wanted to do a PhD with. I thought about it for like 1 or 2 years before I started approaching people for a PhD. We thought for a month or two about postdocs. And
I thought much harder about postdocs than I did about PhD. Like I chose PhD based off of personal stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, not that we didn't choose postdoc based off of personal stuff either.
That's true. Yeah.
But I definitely thought more about the science going into postdoc than I did into PhD.
Yeah, I don't know how many more of these we're going to do. We almost thought that our last episode was our last episode. And so I think
second to last, skip the last.
I think that these kind of rants, I mean, we're now 17 minutes in and we haven't started to talk about the paper. I think that these sort of rants are totally fine. We'll send it to Michael Murrell and I'll be like, here's the thing about your paper. I'd be like, no, it's not. It's about you guys. Shut up. So maybe I'll have to skip to the moment where we actually start to talk about the paper.
Yeah.
But let's talk a bit about the paper.
Before we talk about the paper,
okay.
Have you read this other paper by Michael Murrell, this Nature Communications, F-actin architecture determines the conversion of chemical energy into mechanical work?
Yeah, I think we cited, if we don't cite it, we tried to cite it. I tried to use it to build my model.
In your paper?
In my paper. Okay. And I think I ended up, he talked about it at this soft matter GRC that you dragged me to that I got kicked out of.
Okay. I think for taking a picture of Michael Murrell's slide.
That might be true. I sent him some emails, some questions about it. I wasn't really satisfied with the answers that he gave. But I do think I'm a fan of a lot of his papers. I think that's my favorite of his papers. And I talked to Andre a lot about that paper. I'm like just shy of being able to really use the numbers from it for my own simulation.
Yeah, it's a cool paper. I haven't read it. I just saw the figures that were used in this because he just pulls some of the figures for this review paper. And I was like, man, this seems cool. And it seems like they make some measurements of like ATP consumption rate.
This is like figure 6b?
7 mostly. I mean, they do it in 6 as well, but 7 is what, like the emulsion and then the...
figure 6 and figure 7 are from the same paper.
Yeah. Reference 81.
The way that they get some of these numbers require certain assumptions that I am not sure
hold in your system.
It's not that they hold. I think that if you make those assumptions, you presuppose certain answers in my system. And yeah, I essentially was not able to convert it into something that I could use as an answer for my system. But this did bring up a really interesting thing. This paper, this is a review paper, so it's talking about many, many different papers. Yeah. But this figure 6, figure 7 paper, this Nature Communications Murrell paper, brought up an interesting thing, which is that the power versus ATP that you get from having or not having certain subcomponents in your actomyosin system makes me think about these in vitro cytoskeletal systems. This neuroscientist brought this up, this neuroscientist that we butchered their paper in our first Lemma Journal pub, that, hey, if you make this bicycle and you've made this complicated bicycle and you're trying to figure out how much power do you need to put into pedaling the bicycle versus how fast the bicycle goes, and you forget to put in the little teeth that go into the chain, your bicycle will move forward, but it will be tremendously inefficient.
Yeah.
How can you prove in these in vitro systems that you haven't just forgotten some tiny component of the machine that would make it vastly more efficient? And I thought that was a really good argument. Peter Foster has a rebuttal to that, which I think Peter Foster explicitly told me, please don't share this with other people, because it's like a big card that I think he's trying to play. So we won't talk about his rebuttal to it. Michael Murrell, he says, the first law of thermodynamics, the change in energy is equal the dissipation of energy, Q, minus the work. In non-equilibrium thermodynamics of driven systems, dissipation is not only a cost, but essential. I found this nomenclature, this writing, very confusing. I think what he's driving towards here is that there's no Carnot engine in biology, that in a biological system, there must be a Q term. And because there must be a Q term, work and dissipation always have to be linked. So in some sense, you can say there must be more dissipation as there is more work in some small regime, which is not necessarily true in a world where Carnot engines exist. I think that's what he's driving at. Otherwise, I don't understand what he's saying.
Okay.
So you're looking at me like I'm crazy.
Well, I think that there's maybe a subtle problem with the way that you're wording this, which is not that a Carnot engine doesn't exist in biology. It's that it doesn't have to exist.
Sure. I guess a Carnot engine doesn't exist in non-equilibrium thermodynamics.
Okay.
I think that might be the claim.
Yeah.
And thus, dissipation is essential. It has to happen.
Yeah.
And therefore...
Well, I don't, again, like for the thus, sorry to pick apart, I don't think it's thus. So a Carnot engine doesn't exist in non-equilibrium thermodynamics. You're saying because of that statement, dissipation has to exist?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I think that's what he's saying. Because he has these two very confusing sentences. Mm-hmm. By contrast, in non-equilibrium thermodynamics of driven systems, dissipation is not only a cost, but essential. And then he says, in the driving non-equilibrium case, the system does more work by dissipating more energy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't understand those two sentences, except for the framework that I just proposed.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm missing the link of why dissipation is essential in non-equilibrium thermodynamics. These citations 4 through 9 are like Onsager papers.
Yeah.
So they are just like fundamentals that maybe we're lacking.
Yeah, but if you take it as true, then that's my interpretation of what he's driving at. That dissipation is necessary in a non-equilibrium system, and that it is going to be linearly related to work, so that more work means more energy dissipation. That brings you to a very interesting viewpoint of how living matter and active matter works.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting question that he poses, right?
But I don't think he poses a question. I think he's saying this is how it works.
Oh, yeah. That he says it's how, well, I mean, he says if more and more energy is required to extract work, how do cells achieve precise, coordinated mechanical behaviors without consuming excess energy? Presumably, there are mechanisms to suppress unproductive fluctuations, concentrating the dissipation across certain degrees of freedom and improving the amount of work per unit of dissipation, a qualitatively different goal than just minimizing dissipation.
I guess it would be nice to see the derivation of why in a non-equilibrium case does more dissipation mean more work.
Yeah.
Because it is like a very deep statement. It's up there to me with Colm Keller's thin sheets are easy to bend but hard to stretch.
Yeah.
This next bit, entropy production rates are equal to a summation of fluxes and thermodynamic forces.
Yeah.
Where thermodynamic forces are gradients of an intensive variable. So for instance, like temperature, right? That drives a flux. So flux would be heat here. And so the resulting unit is always entropy production. Mm-hmm. Here, by entropy, we mean degradation into heat that can no longer do work. Yeah. It's very classical, like conjugate variable stuff. But it's slightly different presented than how I used to see it. And then they have these Onsager linear response, which I'm not so familiar with. And I've actually, I spent a lot of time while reading this paper trying to think of like, how would I literally write the code to do some of the measurements being described here? And I had a little bit of trouble with these transport coefficients.
I found these transport coefficients pretty helpful as a like thought tool for trying to understand the differences between these different non-equilibrium systems.
How you use these Onsager?
So like when Lij is equal to Lji, you're in this state of this brucellator.
When they're symmetric, you're in a brucellator.
You're in a brucellator. You're in
Which,
this...
by the way, whole section...
Oh, interesting.
You like the brucellator?
I mean, I found it helpful. So part 1, when energy injection determines system state. So I think this is like how people have been thinking about active systems. And so that's when Lij equals Lji.
I do want to, before we read that, I know I'm in the middle of asking you a question.
Yeah.
But because we're skipping down to that, I just have 2 bits highlighted in green that I think are really powerful. Okay. Michael Murrell says, shift in motor like states and depolymerization and stresses and diffusion and crowding can reshape effective ATP consumption. The mechanical or organizational state of the system itself can influence the injection of energy.
Yeah.
So like the point of the paper, we should have started with this.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try to clip this and put it at the beginning. The point of the paper is that you might have all this chemical energy around, but there's a lot of things that are going into whether or not you are using it and how you are using it.
Yeah.
And so you can't just think about ATP as this thing that is injecting energy at the smallest length scales, right? We talk about active matter injecting energy at the local length scales. You can't just think about my version of it, which is how is the chemical energy patterned? Is there broad patternings of the chemical energy? So it's in one place or another. The other thing you have to think about is how is the chemical energy actually being used?
Yeah.
Because if it's got a pattern and it's not being used at all, then it doesn't have a pattern. If it doesn't have a pattern and it's flat everywhere, but it has a really strong gradient in whether or not it's actually being used, that's the same thing as it having a pattern.
Yeah.
And so we have to think about this. And I think that this is a brilliant and obvious idea.
Well, so I think the point of the paper and the point of part 1 and part 2 is to develop a little bit of the mathematical tools for trying to think about these ideas and to distinguish a situation where you can consider just ATP is everywhere, this is a bath, and when it's not, that's not sufficient. And right, the first thing you have to say is like, this isn't sufficient, let's go look and try to understand, because that's a tremendous amount of work to go and understand all the molecular details. And so I think what this framework he's proposing in the review paper is to be able to distinguish between. And so he outlines it in part 2 when he's talking about this like actin system, which I didn't.
So first he does this part 1, this brusellator.
This brusellator.
And my understanding of this after I finished it was that this is a trivial system in which everything is behaving normally. And it is sufficient to consider ATP a bath here.
Yes.
And I didn't catch that until the end because I was so stuck on trying to figure out equation 8, which he's used in previous papers.
Yeah.
This entropy production by...
Well, so like equation 8, I don't understand.
So equation 8 is that there make a definition of entropy production rate by looking at how a movie plays forward versus how it plays backwards. And so, right, because things that are producing a lot of entropy should look very different going forwards than they look going backwards.
Yeah.
And something that's not producing any entropy will look the same going forwards as going backwards. That's kind of the idea. But then how do you actually do this from a programming perspective? This is what I got really stuck on.
Why from a programming perspective? What about from a practical perspective?
That's what I mean. A programming perspective is a practical perspective. I have a data set. I have some movie that I've taken via microscopy, and I want to quantify to what extent does this look the same going backwards as forwards.
Well, so it just says here, x of t is a trajectory of system variables over time.
Right.
So what system variables? And do you have to have all of them to generate this S dot? So then how do you define when you have all of the system variables?
He has table 1, which is, I find these tables both incredibly information rich and useless. Like I can't think about them.
Well, so this is, I was like, I could understand this if this was about microtubules and conditioning. No, seriously.
Just pretend it is. Nematic order. Pretend it's about microtubules. Bundling. Pretend it's about microtubules. Velocity alignment. All of these you can pretend are microtubules.
No, because the final 2 columns are contractile, low S dot, stable, high S dot.
I have no idea what those 2 columns are supposed to mean.
So I think that in a microtubule kinesin system, we would understand what those columns
mean. But ignore those 2 columns.
Okay.
Just put your hand over them. Here are some variables.
I can actually ignore them without
putting your hand over them? No, I'm a baby. I need to have the object permanence trick to help me out. Here are some variables. You can imagine tracking these variables in a movie and then seeing how those variables move from state to state, forward versus backward. So this state to state is what I have a lot of difficulty with, this trajectory, that you have to have some concept of states to go about this in a stat-mech way. And that is really tricky. This is kind of like, this reminds me strongly of variable-variable correlations or autocorrelations in higher dimensions, 2D, 3D, 4D, where there really is only one right way to do it. But what that one right way to do it is is very non-trivial. And so I would sit there arguing with people about the right way to do it for months before we could coalesce. And so here, it seems extremely non-trivial to do this from a programming perspective. That you essentially,
Okay. Do you have to couple these variables?
Right. So that's a question. So you could, I think that you can say the entropy production rate from pneumatic order, the entropy production rate.
But it would be the sum
bundling
of all of these production rates is going to give you the total entropy production.
I think trying to talk about the total entropy production rate is a fool's errand. So we talked about 2 podcasts ago how if you do the sun, which is and you put a box around the sun, you can talk about the energy production rate in Boltzmann's very solidly.
Right.
Here, I think that there are too many different kinds of molecules, too many different kinds of states. I mean, maybe you can do it, but you have to have information at every single scale. You have to understand the molecules to get. So I think all you can do is place lower bounds on the entropy production rate.
Okay. But I mean, the statement, he cites 51. I don't know what the article is. A statement that I highlighted in green, which green is my code for maybe Bez can explain this to me. Thus, by quantifying the irreversibility of the system dynamics, one can estimate the production of entropy, S dot, a correlate to the dissipation of energy.
Right. But I do think it's like of that specific thing at that specific scale.
Okay.
Because, for instance, if you are taking images of a system, that tells you nothing about the chemical state of the underlying molecules.
Yeah. And so then what is the value of S dot if you're not including
everything?
Well,
so for instance, one thing that I think is fairly interesting that I was talking about earlier today with Peter is in Peter's paper, he measures the heat dissipation from the system.
Yeah.
And then he measures the mechanical work at a certain scale, at this very high length scale from the system. And one could also measure the entropy production rate at this very high length scale of the system. And kind of the thing that you learn is that there's very little work being done or entropy production being done at that big length scale. And so then it creates the question, is the main source of entropy production or the main source of work happening at a molecular length scale instead? You're trying to point out that getting the full entropy production rate in a complex system is an impossible measurement.
I think that is true.
But my response to this is always the way that you make an impossible measurement is you take an infinite sum of really hard measurements. And I do think that that is an acceptable approach here.
I think at some point in this paper, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I am projecting this on the paper, that they're using S dot to say how out of equilibrium a system is, how far from equilibrium a system is. And how can you do that if you don't have units, if you don't have an absolute magnitude of S dot?
I don't know where you're talking about, but let's say that you're correct for a moment. You can have a lower bound on it, right? And so if you see the lower bound is increasing, that's pretty useful.
If you see the lower bound is increasing.
Yeah, so again, you might not be able to get the full entropy production rate, but you can say the entropy production rate of these certain things at these certain scales. So you can say the number cannot be smaller than this.
Okay.
And in some sense, entropy production rate is, again, the amount of energy that has been turned into heat and can no longer be used as work, right? And so if you also get the heat production and know your initial chemical energy allotment, and you also start to know some of the work at some scales, again, you're not omniscient, I guess. You're not omniscient. You can never know everything about these complex systems at once, but you are starting to really chisel away at a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. I think the big problem is that things hide in scale from you, that there can be things happening at bigger or smaller scales than where you're looking that you can be blind to. But again, if the lower bound is exponentially going up, you can no longer say that the whole thing is going down or something like that, right? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah, so in figure 2D, they plot S dot versus delta mu. So I guess you're saying what they're plotting is the minimum entropy production rate.
Yes, although I think that this here is a theoretical system.
It could be that this is the brucillator, so...
Yeah, it was unclear to me if the brucillator was a physical system or But if you're doing a simulation, then you can get...
all of these.
Exactly, and you can get a real S dot. You can get the real entropy production rate fully, which I think is an interesting thing.
Yeah, okay. But this was this was just, I think, setting the stage.
Yeah.
Of this is the way that
I found
we
it
can
confusing.
think about it to spend so much time setting the stage.
I found it confusing because I didn't understand that it was setting the stage.
Okay.
And so I was like, where is this going to come up? And then we got to the next section. And then I was like, oh, I think the previous one was setting the stage. So then we do this actomyosin system.
Yeah. And so this is where I found Lij to be helpful.
Okay.
And he explicitly spells it out for you for why it matters. So in I, double I, and triple I.
I like to call those 1, 2, and 3.
Well, we're in part 2, where as the coupling between the biochemistry and the mechanical components increases, your L12 and L21 become not equal. Although he messes up, I think, his subscripts at some point.
Yeah, he does. It's L12, L12. It should be L21. He at one point writes L12 does not equal L12.
Yeah. But for me, I didn't notice the first time.
We talk about typos that you can never fix ever once they get published because the journals won't let you fix anything because they're schmucks.
Yeah.
That'll never get fixed. That'll be there forever. And it's like just the trivialist typo. I found this confusing.
Okay. Why did you find it confusing?
Because it's so much math to get this Onsager matrix and these entropy production rates that you're going to start with like an image and think about pixel fluctuations in grayscale to try to predict forward versus backward probabilities. Mm-hmm. And there's just many, many operations from an analysis perspective from the original data. And I think that will make it hard to get reliable readings, that this is very similar to like taking a third or fourth derivative of a measurement. For me to calculate L12 and L21 from a movie of a system, I think would be very noisy, that the noise is going to get real big.
Wait. L12 and L21 are coming from entropy production rate?
Well, they're coming from your system. You got to calculate them. They're not like, I mean, where in your mind are you getting them from?
Yeah, I'm forgetting now, but I thought they were introduced before entropy production rates.
We have to compare the entropy production rates to the Onsager coefficients, right? So we have to calculate the Onsager coefficients.
Where does he first bring them up?
Sorry, this rooster is really
I know.
grating on me. I think we gotta like put the rooster indoors when we're recording them. Yeah, where do they first come up? They first come up in equation 3, that the fluxes are equal to the summations of the Onsager coefficients times the forces.
Oh, okay. Yeah, way earlier. So, yeah, so this seems doable to measure the Onsager. Oh, no, because what are the forces?
And what are the fluxes?
Well, fluxes are the movements of...
No, the flux has to have a unit of an extensive variable.
Okay.
So it has to be like heat flux.
Okay.
And I was thinking that you back them out. Yeah. It was tricky to me to see how I'm going to get the Onsager coefficients. It's tricky for me to see how I get the entropy production rate, even though he's done it in papers before and I've watched how he does it in papers before. I remember showing a paper of his to people in 2017, 2018 that Danny's on and being like, ooh, look at this. What do you think of this calculation of entropy production rate? And everyone was like, don't look at that. And it was my beginning of realizing that people really didn't want to talk to me about entropy stuff.
What did you think of EPR?
You could just use S dot. I don't see why not just use S dot instead of EPR.
There was a time where I had forgotten what EPR.
I guess I don't like it that much because I wouldn't use it. That I was thinking as reading this, that if I get the chance to go back to the systems that I have studied during my postdoc and approach them from a more physicsy perspective, because something that I've been pretty angsty about is that I really had to study them from this kind of chemical biology perspective, that I couldn't go full biology. Thank God. I'm not salty about that. But I also couldn't go full physics while I was in this lab. If I get a chance to go full physics on these systems again in the future, I think a project that I would work on is trying to measure entropy production rates and stuff like this. And I don't think I would use the word EPR. I think I would use S dot.
S dot.
Throughout the whole thing.
I wonder if there's a way to distinguish what length scale you're measuring entropy production at, or like S dot of this process or this field.
He does do subsets of S dot mech and S dot chem.
That's true.
And stuff like this.
Okay.
It made me think a lot about, he talks about like peak S dot mechanical and stuff like this. And so that he doesn't have a thing where like S dot is increasing exponentially. He has a non-monotonic curve of the entropy production rate.
Yeah.
And this really brought to mind this idea that David was talking about of sometimes when you're designing something, when you're optimizing something, you're optimizing for like being at this unstable point. And he talked about the jet fighters are built such that when they're flying, they're really unstable. They're really likely to like pitch down or pitch up really violently. And that's intentional so that the jet fighter is super maneuverable, that it can swing one way or the other really suddenly.
Self-organized criticality.
Self-organized criticality. This is his like Cytoquakes paper that's with this Pampla person who does Julia down in Maryland. I love both of these people. I didn't really get that paper, like on a deep sense. I did not get that paper.
I don't think I've read it.
I might come back to that paper now that I've read this.
I found,
Also talking about David, he talks about how this S dot mechanical, and this is reflective of a particular subsystem, not the entire system or its partner subsystem. So it is, again, this like you have a bunch of connected compartment systems and some Maxwell Demon stuff going on, and you're really only making measurement of one. And so like you're going to need information about the information going between compartments as well as the subsystems.
So should we talk a little bit about information since you bring it up?
I was really excited to hear a lot about information and stuff like this. Michael really just, in the most cursory way, floats over information.
Well, it's in the discussion. So you had told me that this paper would get easier to read as I went through it. I think it only got easier at the discussion.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say it only got harder, but yeah.
Oh, no, it did get easier. I'm just saying that it's just a long discussion.
I didn't think there was anything particularly deep about his discussion of information. I think that maybe his definition of information is not necessarily the same as John and David's.
He does have KBTI.
Yeah, that's what I was highlighted read. I was like, I don't know.
Well, so like what's the units of information? But at least in this description, and kind of in the last paper, to me, information feels like the dark matter of statistical physics. It's like we know something is happening, like we know it's there, we know that it's contributing to our free energies, but we don't really understand what it is.
I don't like that analogy simply because it makes information sound so fascinating, and I so am uninterested in information.
Oh yeah, we've just done 2 papers on information.
Brilliant. We should start calling it dark information.
Dark information.
No, really. We should start calling it dark information. Just have started calling these chimagraphs space-time chimagraphs. We should call it dark information.
Well, I mean, sometimes I feel like it's not dark information, like in the optical trap setup.
They could call that, the next paper should be shining light on dark information.
Yeah. Exactly. Anyways, that's the only comment I had on their role of information.
We skipped a lot just now, but I think that that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a giant paper. There's no way we can talk about all of it. I'm
just going to talk a little bit more about things that I love, which is this connection between energy consumption and mechanical load that he touches on for just a moment. That there's a coupling between load and energetics. And he talks about this Fenn experiment and the Fenn effect, which I had heard about before, that you take a frog muscle. And it's interesting. They say like the Fenn effect reflects a fundamental principle that precedes and supports the thesis presented here. Mechanical behavior and energy consumption are coupled, such that the energetic cost depends on the system's mechanical state. I always really love when people say, I'm not the first person to think about this. Here's somebody else who thought about it. That really makes me quite happy when I hear people talk about that.
Yeah.
And then he talks about a little bit later, while the overall ATP may not always be limiting, is it diffusion or reaction limited in the vicinity in which it is used?
Yeah. Or I don't know, this is hugely speculative, so I won't say it.
Acknowledgements. Sven Whithouse.
Yeah, so this made me Google Sven because I knew he went to Yale. He's in Murrell's lab now.
Oh, cool,
yeah.
Cool.
So that's cool. All a very small community. And yeah, so for the local ATP accessibility, we have this one-off result in my active system that ATP is enriched inside the condensate.
Yeah.
And this has always been, kind of interesting to me.
But then also, again, I think a thing to think about that on top of that now is, aside from the patterning of the ATP itself.
Yeah. So what is
the patterning of ATP usage?
So is it easier? Because even without, it can inform how you would get that pattern too. Right?
Yeah.
Because if it's easier to use the ATP outside of the condensate, that would deplete ATP from outside the condensate and enrich it inside.
Yeah.
And so it can It's not
depending on the diffusion coefficients. Yeah.
Yeah. It not only can tell you about, it's not only interesting to think of downstream of the ATP patterning measurement, but upstream. So.
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful paper. I think it's a lot of beautiful ideas. A lot of them have been coming together for a long time. We still haven't really gotten what we wanted, which was a David-style discussion of energy and information at a many component system. That, as we said, Michael Murrell did not write that much about information. He just kind of touches on it. And I said this at the beginning, I'll say this at the end. In the end, I love this paper. I didn't actually get what I was hoping to get from the paper.
Yeah, to me, it was a surprising paper in a lot of ways. And like the big things I got from the paper are, this first section of the introduction, when more fuel does not mean more work, is really good food for thought.
Yeah.
And then the last equation of the paper, the equation 12, that the power of ATP depends on the state of the system.
It's a beautiful equation. It's not the last equation. There's two more equations after that. But it is a beautiful equation. It's just like the simplest, stupidest fucking equation.
Yeah, but this is like what the whole...
Yeah.
And it like really felt like on a writing side that the paper was building to this equation. And when he wrote that equation, he was like, and so this is why I think this. Because it's like, it's not a deep, like you don't have to be a theorist to write down that equation, right?
You have some complaints?
Most of my complaints are just terminology.
But not table related?
Well, I already complained about the table.
You complained about table 1. You don't have a complaint about table 2?
Yeah, table 2, same complaint. I skipped table 2 because I already realized my problem with table 1, which was that it wasn't kinesin centered. No, I just found like the amount of jargon in this paper was a little, for somebody who hasn't been thinking about this problem, like a lot. So I have a lot of red, like self-organized criticality.
Yeah, it really is.
Energy is a subsystem, broken reciprocity.
It really is like a summary of all of his other papers. And if you haven't been following his publications for the last 9 years or so, it is... Again, I think
it's a minor thing because by the end, I feel like I got the core of the paper. And if I was like joining his lab, obviously I would figure out what these other words meant and why they were important. But my main red complaints.
Every 10 years, you just write a review paper summarizing all of your work. But I guess you have to be doing work in one vein the whole time. So my review paper after 10 years would probably be like this and this completely other thing and this thing and birds.
No, there's always going to be some thread.
But I really did think from figure 1 that this was going to be what we were looking for.
Yeah. Do we want to... we've touched on what we think is beautiful about the paper. If you could add anything to the paper.
It's a review paper. I don't know if that question makes any sense. If I could add anything to the paper, I would add some deep, interesting review about dark information.
Yeah.
And our deepest takeaways from the paper, I think, is like really think about, we've always been talking about the patterning of the energy. And I still think that that's the best thing to think about. But on top of that, think about the patterning of the energy use. And I've kind of been learning that anyways, because that's really what the theory to my paper ended up being, is that it's about the patterning of the actomyosin that creates a patterning of ATP, not vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're pretty done.
Yeah. Would love to end up at Yale.
Man, it looked so possible like 2 or 3 years ago. And now it just looks like a total ridiculous fantasy.
Yeah. Anyways, probably too sad to talk about. So
yeah,
great to read this paper. Great to see that get an update on Sven and where he's ended up.
Should we give people like a warning that these might be ending at any episode? We almost made the last episode. We almost didn't upload it. And so I'm wondering if we should say to people, hey, this might be the last episode.
I guess think not. So. Like,
okay.
Just Irish goodbye it, right?
Yeah. All right. So on that note, maybe an Irish goodbye, maybe not. Bye.